You've seen the specs, 16 to 300 mil. That represents about 90% of all of the shots that I take in the course of a year. That is one size fits all. That is one lens for every use case in my landscape photography. That's astounding. Already, in my mind's eye, I'm composing award-winning shots whilst roaming the mountains with this ultra-light, ultra-convenient lens. You start reading the reviews, you watch YouTube, and you see all the influencers parading the benefits of this lens, but you start to see one little phrase creeping in to more and more of the reviews, and that phrase is optical compromise. You're looking at a lens that costs 700 euros. Now, the equivalent lens in my collection is a Canon 70 to 300 mil. It only covers a portion of the focal range of this lens, but it cost more than twice as much. So surely compromise is necessary, isn't it? It's inevitable. And you start to rationalize it. Is there a place for this lens in my kit bag? Can I see myself using this lens every day? What are the chances? What are the occasions when I would use this lens? So what I'm trying to do with this review is set out what this lens is really good for, where the compromises have been achieved and how well they've been achieved. In other words, do they actually compromise the function of this lens or do they not? And I try to set out as well who I think this lens will benefit. And by that, what I mean is, what is the peak of realistic expectation and who are the people that will really love this lens from the moment they buy it to the moment they eventually discard it. So, extraordinary specifications. It's actually, I didn't include this in the spec, but it is literally half the price of my Canon 70 to 300, slightly less than half the price. It's also half the weight, shorter and I think thinner. It is a very convenient lens, there's no questioning that. The zoom range is absolutely exceptional. It's pretty sharp, not uniformly sharp across the entire zoom range, but we're going to have a look at that in more detail later on. The only thing to quibble about in this is perhaps the variable aperture, because this makes this lens quite dependent on light. I mean, every lens is dependent on light, but this lens is effectively a darker lens. You're going to need more light to get the best out of this lens, and I would expect to see performance drop off as the light diminishes. Okay, so this is the Sigma lens. This is the 16 to 300 mil lens. Now, this is the Canon. So 70 to 300 mil. It's pretty much by volume twice the size. It's certainly twice the weight. Very heavy lens, this, but nonetheless. But this is what we're talking about. So this is the Sigma. Remove the shields. Then we've got our zoom control. And let's have a look at this. Now that is interesting. It's a good firm action, which means that this could be really useful in video. I can get a really smooth zoom on that. No controls really basically on the thing. The focus ring also nice and smooth, so I can pull focus for video really well. There's more, it's lighter than the zoom, but that's a good thing. The zoom is sufficiently tight, if you like, to mean that there is no way that's going to creep. You know, if you're walking around between shots. The only other control here is the lock here, and what this is for is when the lens is closed down, put the lock on, store it. No matter what the circumstances, that lens is now not going to move. So that's that. Now you'll notice there's no image stabilization switch on this. Neither is there a manual or autofocus. So image stabilization is all carried out in camera. The autofocus is also carried out on the camera. Now I pair it with the Canon R7, and if you'll notice, what we've got here is an autofocus switch. So switching this from manual to auto determines how the lens behaves after that. So all in all, good news. Now, quality of the build is made of plastic, but it feels good, it feels substantial, it looks very well made, the handling is very smooth. Still, as a Canon user, I can't get over the size of this thing. It's tiny. So I think we can learn a few things from these pictures. The first is, I should state up front, is that the conditions in the evening shots, so the first section of shots up until the moon, were quite hazy, quite cloudy, and there was quite a lot of heat haze. This was early evening going through till darkness in Spain. The temperature's right up around about 40 degrees. So atmospheric conditions militate against some of these pictures. Now, what I take from this is that I was very impressed with the ability, given that there was sufficient light, the ability to focus really fast. Focusing was practically instant. Color reproduction, not as good as Canon, I would have to say, but then this is a lens that costs half as much, and you can compensate for that in post-processing. So all of these pictures have had basic post-processing performed. So no local edits, just the global edits that you get in the basic panel. So I think that, the colour science not being as good as Canon's is not really an issue for me, because I know that I can pull that back in post-processing. What else? I think that I was very surprised at this at 16mm. I was very surprised how good the edge detail is. Normally that edge detail will fall off radically. So if you look at something like the Canon 1740 L lens, you'll find there's a lot of fall off at the edges. And I'm not seeing as much, surprisingly, with this lens in the landscape photographs at 16mm. However, when we move to the focus charts, we're probably going to have a much more exact measurement of that. So that will be much more of a sort of scientific test. I noticed that the performance does fall off, the sharpness falls off as you get darker. So if you're looking at the sunset photograph and the moon photograph, they're both soft by my, compared to what I'm used to with the Canon lenses. But having said that, they're perfectly good enough for social media where the photograph is going to get compressed in any case. So I would say that. So let's move on to the focus chart test. Okay, so the way that I've done this lens testing is really far from scientific, but it is more scientific than pointing it at some foliage and assessing whether it's sharp or not from that. So what I've used the US Air Force lens testing target, and this is arranged basically in a sequence of letters, dashes, and numbers, a pattern that's repeated in ever-reducing size. So the smallest size on this is literally characters of less than 1 millimeter across, so it would be very hard for any lens to pick up. Now, the way that you're supposed to do this is to position the camera about 17 meters from the target, and take it from there. And given that the lens has got such a wide throw, the target at 17 meters away from the target at the widest 16 mil of the lens is going to be a tiny, tiny little bit of the photograph. So I had to improvise a little, which reduces the science content of this section to a shambolic heap, in fact. But I think we've got enough to make some conclusions. So I've tested on 300 mil, 180 mil, 100, 50, 24, and 16. And at each of these focal lengths, I've used a variety of f-stops. Now, again, in the lab conditions, you're supposed to use f-stops that go up by 1 stop and record the whole range. And I honestly don't think I could bring myself to inflict that much data on you in a YouTube video. So what I've done is I've tested it at f7.1, or rather I've tested it at the widest available aperture. So remember that this lens has got variable aperture. So the 300 mil, I've tested it at f7.1, f11, f18 and f22. And at 16 mil, I've tested it at f3.5 because that's the widest aperture that's available. F11, f18 and f22. Now the slight anomaly here is the f7.1 that the camera insisted that I was using at 300 mil. Because according to the specification, the lens will support f6.3 at 300 mil. So I'm not quite sure where that f7.1 comes from, but it's not particularly good news because it's f7.1 is obviously darker than 6.3. You would need a lot of light, and I think this is borne out in the actual photographs that I took, where I started to run into trouble gaining focus on the in the later part of the evening when I was at 300 mil or thereabouts. So yeah, worth knowing. Okay, so the first set of figures for 300 mil comes in f7.1 is soft, f11 pin sharp, f18 acceptably sharp, and f22 soft. Now I'm differentiating between acceptably sharp and pin sharp. Pin sharp basically means as sharp as this target is. Having said which, the target was printed on an inkjet printer, so it's not in itself incredibly sharp, but it means that I was able to read a much smaller size of text than I could at the other apertures. So pin sharp is perfect. We don't often see pin sharp, but you look for it in portrait photography for sure. Anything else that looks sharp is acceptably sharp, and then below that there's a sort of sharp which is kind of, it's not blurry, but it is, you know, it's not pin sharp or even acceptably sharp. So I've graded it like that, and for 300mm we've got f7.1 soft, no doubt about it, f11 pin sharp, absolutely fantastic at 300mm, f18 acceptably sharp, again really good, f22 soft, and I found this all the way through. So f22 is not, to my mind, not worth using. Having said which, it's probably not worth using on almost any lens, unless you're trying to get sun stars or something like that. At 180mm, I encountered something rather odd. So I found that 6.3 and 11 were sharp, 11 slightly sharper than 6.3, so they're both acceptably sharp. 18, it was dipping off a bit. In my notes I've written sharpish, which is a new grade, somewhere between sharp and not sharp. And 22 soft. Now, what's perturbing me a little bit about this is that I read another review, and I can't honestly remember off the top of my head whose it was, but they said that they had found that the lens dropped off round about 100mm. I've found it at 180, so we've not got anything that's really pin sharp at 180. I'm wondering if there's a you know, if there is variation between individual examples of this lens, or whether the other reviewer was actually somewhere around 150 rather than 100, because I found 100 to be much sharper. So yeah, as I just mentioned, I've found 100 to be probably the best focal length in this lens. So 6.3, not so much. 11 pin sharp, 18 and 22 acceptably sharp. So that's a really good performance, and yeah, it's a mystery to me as to why another reviewer found that to be the worst focal length. But for me, in this particular copy of this lens, this is excellent. 50 and 24mm I found to be very, very similar in that the widest aperture available was sharp, f11 acceptably sharp, f18 sharp, and f22 not so sharp, sharpish, I think. In the 24mm, f22 is decidedly soft, I found. So it seems to me that the range 50 to 100 is pretty reliable, as is the far end of the scale at 300. But yeah, that's my impression. So f16, the widest part of this lens, the widest range of this lens. Now, I kind of half expected, cynical old man that I am, f16 to be a bit of a blowout. It's extremely wide. However, I was really surprised in that 3.5 is sharp, even in the corners it's sharp. Not perhaps as sharp as it is in the centre, but it's certainly sharp enough. 11 pin sharp, 8, and then it drops off. 18, 22, much softer. 16mm is a very wide angle indeed, so there's no real need to be using f18 and f22, I don't think, at 16mm. Simply because the background is the nature of a wide angle lens. The foreground is much more emphasized, and the background is much smaller relative to the foreground. So you're not really looking for that sort of front to back pin sharpness. I find this perfectly good enough. I'm going to stick my neck out a little and say, because I sort of foreshortened and compressed the test, so I didn't test at a particularly low aperture around 6.3. So I'm sticking my neck out, and I'm going to guess that the sweet spot of this lens, although it's indicated in the tests at f11, I would guess that it's actually 7.1, between 7.1 and f11, maybe f14, would give you great sharp pictures as pretty much all the way through the focal range of this lens. The only other downside I found to it was the fact that performance falls off so badly in low light, and that's kind of to be expected. In a sense, that's nothing to do, or it's a little to do with the lens, but it is a lot to do with the camera and the APS-C sensor. APS-C sensors are not great in low light. This is sort of pretty common across the board with every camera manufacturer, so I can't really point the finger particularly at Sigma in that. But having said that, the pictures that I took in low light, the sunset, the moon, they're perfectly acceptable for social media. They probably wouldn't print them, but you know, it really does depend what you're doing. So I would say if you're a professional photographer, this lens has got a great deal going for it in terms of convenience. So if you're doing travel photography, or if you're researching locations, if you're doing daylight photography, this lens is really good. It's really convenient, it's really light, and paired with something like the Canon R7, you've got a really light combo that will give you all of the focal range that you will need. That spares me taking a very heavy rucksack on a lot of the occasions that I go out. So this will definitely have a place in my kit bag, no question. I think that people that are going to use this lens for professional purposes would be probably influencers and travel photographers. So if you're an influencer stepping up from an all-in-one point-and-shoot camera, this is a good way to go. This will give you a fantastic reach, and it will give you really good sharpness. It's far better than a mobile phone photo combo, for example. Okay, so that pretty much sums it up. I feel that I've been very critical of the lens, but I really wanted to understand and to bottom out some of the comments that I've read in other reviews, some of the other things that other people are saying about it. And yes, it does have some weaknesses, that's absolutely for sure. But as I mentioned, or as I have mentioned in the past, I only have 4 lenses out of a collection of something like 17 Canon L-class lenses. I only have 4 that matched my inflated expectations at the beginning of my experience of them. I've kept them all, and they all have a place in my workflow. So that's good. So yeah, I think this is well worth the $700, €700 investment. It's something of an engineering miracle. It's not perfect. It does have its flaws, but it is a step above anything else on the market that has equivalent focal length. All right, guys, I hope this has been useful. It's the first lens review that I've done, strictly speaking, and I hope that there's enough detail in here for you. If you've got any questions, put them down below. If you found the video useful, do give us a like, and do subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. I have more lenses coming down the line for review. All right, guys, see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye now.